Hello, everyone. Everyone in healthcare has a story that they never forget. Some are beautiful, some are difficult, and most are never told. This is the space where doctors talk about moments that change them. Welcome to HUMED, where we talk about the emotional, moral, and human realities of medicine. I'm Dr. David Spiro, your host. Thanks for being here. We just hit 10,000 subscribers. We're really excited, and please hit subscribe if you would like to hear more. Today, we're incredibly honored to have Dr. Michael Milobsky. He is a board-certified pediatrician. He's been practicing for 25 years in Denver, Colorado, which I know very well, where I did my residency, and is a great place to practice pediatrics. His practice has been very varied over the course of his 25 years. He has and has continued to work in the pediatric emergency department as a hospitalist in primary care, adolescent mental health and addiction. And he's the owner of a large ordinary care practice in Castle Rock, Colorado, called Pediatric at the Meadows, and owns a concierge pediatric practice, Chicken Soup Concierge Pediatric Care. And if those of you who don't know, the chicken soup is what is also known, AKA, as Jewish penicillin, and which is a great name for a concierge practice. Most importantly, he and his wife have been married for 31 years. They have 7 children and 4 grandchildren, which is a big mazel tov. And Michael, welcome to the show.
Honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, would love to hear a little bit about the story. We talked while I was in Costa Rica on vacation and had a really nice connection. And you've had such an interesting life. And by the way, Dr. Milobsky has over 410,000 Instagram followers. He's an active user of social media, which we could talk about later in the show. But let's start off with the story. I really would love to hear what you'd like to bring to the audience today.
Yeah. You know, I I didn't go into pediatrics with the intention of going into business for myself. I was very happy being a pediatric emergency and employed hospitalist, but with the size of my family and also just the changing landscape, I realized that I needed and wanted to go into business for myself, and that's why I opened my own practice, and that has evolved. But I think what the story of my last 5 years has really been about my physical and emotional transformation. I started having, real health problems around, especially around my foot for the last, for 7 or 8 years. I was a Division I college basketball player at Penn and put about 25 years of pounding on feet that were just probably not meant for that. Started to have a lot of breakdown, especially in my left foot, and then started getting on the surgery carousel with corrective surgery, hardware, complications, removal. And for the last 3 years, I was really in kind of like a physical and emotional free fall, and I was just trying to hold it together. I'm the provider for my family, um, and running a business and managing employees, managing patients, managing a busy practice, and at the same time, dealing with chronic pain, worsening physical health. 3 years ago, my second set of hardware got infected. I got septic and was in the ICU and couldn't
Oh
work
my
for a
gosh.
month, almost died. Um,
So
and
many folks in our audience are not physicians. So can you describe to them what you mean by septic
yeah,
and what
the,
that
the
means?
hardware, the hardware in my foot got infected with bacteria, which then seeded my bloodstream and which set off this cascade of, a rapid inflammatory cascade, which, um, you know, dropped my blood pressure and is deadly. And I was hospitalized for 8 days. I had a line in my arm for 3 months getting antibiotics. I couldn't work for the first time. I couldn't work for a prolonged period of time. And that was actually, yeah, I almost couldn't support my family. The practice is I'm the face and the producer of the practice, even though I have multiple doctors working for me. But it was a very, very terrifying time, um, physically and emotionally. I was able to come back from that, but the the 2 years after that were mostly colored by chronic pain and worsening health. That foot continued to deteriorate and color my all of you don't realize what chronic pain does to you emotionally. If any of you, any people in the audience have been through a physical challenge, whether it's your back or something else where you're dealing with chronic pain every day and having, because you have these other obligations you just have to put it aside and try to function. But I was in an emotional and physical just hole and getting worse and didn't really see a way out because I felt trapped by my need to produce for my family who relied on me. I have 7 children. Most of them are grown up, but school tuitions, college tuitions, a child in med school who I'm paying for, a mortgage, all those things were on the table, and yet I was um, becoming an absolute emotional and spiritual mess. I really couldn't
Mm,
show up for anybody. I was just trying to get through the day. Um, and then I remember that I think 18 months ago, roughly, is where I think there was the emotional rock bottom. I was I think I had distanced myself from everyone in my life. I had distanced myself from my family. Um, all I could do was get to work and get home and just shut down. And then we had an intervention. My family basically said, "You're not the version of yourself that you need to be." And no one else in this house can figure out what that needs to be to get there. You're the only one that can. So I started getting help for the first time. And many of us who are physicians accepting help and asking for help for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, but I'm sure I'm not the only one, was something I was very bad at. And it's not something that in our generation of physicians we were really ever empowered to do. We were I think that we were in the culture around our lives was just do more, just no one no one cares, work harder was kind of where I was. And so I started getting help for the first time, asking for help.
mm.
And
And was
then
that help more in regard to emotional and seeing a
it had to
therapist and
start with the emotional
mhm,
and the
mhm,
healing there. Um, with with becoming emotionally healthy and aware enough that to understand that I'm the only one that can be responsible for my own well-being and my own happiness as long as you've been married to somebody or however many children you have, none of them can take that responsibility. And when I open myself up to that, then of course you start opening yourself up to long unhealed and unaddressed wounds that you'd never talked about and that I'd never talked about and never addressed. And how all of that played into where I was. And when I find and after many months of delving into that, it put me in a place where I could actually say, now I need to address this physical thing. And so I did something that I had avoided and dreaded, and I made an appointment with the limb salvage clinic at university and met with them. And they, of course, told me what I expected was I was going to hear, that you are not going to get better. I was not going to get better until I amputated the foot. And as someone who has always defined themselves very much by my physicality and my strength and being the being the strong, self-sufficient, you know, household leader and business leader, that was a really devastating and difficult thing to hear. I think I cried 3
And
times during it.
also and also a former Division One
Yes, I mean, I
athlete.
had it had been this is how I had viewed myself. My external sort of camera view of who I was couldn't accept that change or that version. So, and before I left, I had made an appointment June 30th. We're gonna amputate that foot below the knee. They don't just amputate your foot. They have to, in order to give you functional recovery through a prosthetic, they have to take it off below the knee. It was below the no, so kind of halfway up your shin. And I did also. So I embarked on a mission to make myself as healthy emotionally and physically as I could before that surgery. And June 30th, my wife drove me to the hospital. I was, it, of course, none of us know what mortality is like, but that idea that you're gonna go through this door of transformation and wake up and have no idea what to expect of how I'm gonna feel or what it's gonna look like. And so I woke up and you look down at the end of your bed and it's a very different view. And I was hospitalized for 4 days. And then I was just sent home to heal. And the first 6 or 8 weeks of getting over this, there's no foot. There's just figuring out how to get back to your life without one. So I got really good at crutches. Think I had a lot of experience with crutches and scooter. I went back to work in 2 weeks after the surgery, just without a foot.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
but what was unexpected to me was the incredible transformation that unfolded on every level when I removed my pain. I removed this diseased part of myself that was making me sick. Within a week, the difference was incredible. My
The difference
energy,
emotionally, your
everything,
emotional everything.
my everything, my 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 ability to accept and dial in and and be present and show up and be able to delve into even more of that work that I was doing spiritually and emotionally before the surgery. And it has since been completely transformative. And when you're not in pain and it's like pruning, it was like pruning a tree. Like everything became healthier. And then my wife and I, who have been struggling, you know, in our relationship through all of this because she didn't have any way to help me, that started a process of repair. And the other thing that changed is that my wife and I forever have been talking about we need a plan. With what I'm doing with professionally was not a sustainable thing, and retirement isn't on the table. And we were able to sit down and map out a roadmap. What did we want the next 3, 5, 10 years to look like? And then we began to execute on it. And then we began very quickly to see the fruit of that process show up because I was fundamentally changed and fundamentally different. My energy, my ability to actualize things and to show up in a totally different way with a totally different energy was completely different. We decided to lean into content and social media, decided to take it seriously, decided to build the concierge practice as a path to transitioning my professional life. And over the last 6 months, it has been an absolute 180. Everything starts to fall into place. I can, I have a bandwidth and a capacity an ability to connect and show up and continue to heal myself and heal my family and heal my relationships. And then all of that has shown up in this transformation of my professional life. The concierge practice continues to grow. My social media and my content went from 45,000 followers to 410,000 followers in 6 months, and that has led to opportunities upon opportunities that I never had even considered. They just keep, they show up. And but more importantly is that I have the ability, the chance to be a emotionally healthy and spiritual healthy person that is now able to show up for my own family where I really wasn't. I was physically present, but I was absent. And so the amount of healing in my own life has been hard to describe. Is not something I could have ever articulated if I wasn't experiencing it. Would never have been able to guess that would have been this dramatic.
Well, I want to say a few things. One is you're my hero. You've really moved me today, and you've moved my heart, and very viscerally. And you're the reason why I started this show because I think that um, we as physicians kind of go through really difficult times, and I think, and I wanted to ask you this, but I think that there's something about the training that we go through, and then the expectations after you're done with training that almost sometimes puts off the ability to be a human being and to we don't need to focus on this, it'll get better. The physical stuff, it'll get better. And I what do you think it is about the training, which can be difficult, right? I mean, when I was in Denver as a resident, I was on every third night for 3 years, and I was sleep deprived almost for 3 straight years. And then you carry a lot of the weight of caring for sick children the way we do as pediatricians. So, what do you think it is about medical training and then after medical training that precludes our ability to actually deal with physical and emotional problems?
It's a great question. The first thing I is, and I may be wrong, but because my son's graduating from med school, and I see that there, I think the winds are shifting. I think that there is more, may not be perfect, but I think there is at least a more of a attention and acknowledgement that physicians need through their training process to be acknowledged as being able to ask for help, admit flaws, be able to seek support in a way that doesn't judge them for being weak or inadequate. But that is what the message, whether it was overt or implied, the message I got through medical school and residency, and I was at a large hospital and medical center in Baltimore for that whole process, was your job is to shut up, to show up, and not need anything from us, but we just talk. You're supposed to be there for the patients. You're not supposed to need anything, and if you do, and if you start acknowledging it, then you're flawed. You're not. You don't. You're not cutting it. You're weak, and the truth is that 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 was very much in line with what I got as a Division I college athlete as well. In the late '80s, early '90s, there was no space to acknowledge my pain or to acknowledge my insecurities, or I was feeling, that things weren't going well and I'm sad. That was you show up, you suck it up, and and be there, and whatever happens happens. And that skill set was just reinforced in my medical school and residency path. And so when my adult life shows up, with marriage and children, well, that was the way that I handled everything. And the problem is that it works for a while until it doesn't. It, it, it just took a very long time to be obvious that this is not working. But but that that for me was the strongest message that I got through that training, and it took a very long time in my adult life to break through that and acknowledge that this isn't working anymore.
So what is the relationship between the physical and the emotional? You were very articulate in describing that, and um, for those, many of our viewers are actually younger, in the 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, and they've not experienced chronic pain. Maybe some have, but I'm just curious, with your experience, how you see the two being related, specifically in terms of the work that you were doing.
Yeah, I think through this process, I've become a better doctor because you realize that we are all a very integrated system and that all of these things are connected in a very deep metaphysical and transcendental way that I couldn't appreciate until really, truly, I went through this process. That when you are dealing with chronic pain, whatever source, and physical deterioration, we are truly such an integrated system that it sucks your emotional well down to zero, and then you start relying on coping and and whatever you can scrape out of that dry well to simply get up and keep going because you have responsibilities and obligations to others that don't seem to really end, whether it's your patients, it's your employees, it's your business, it's your family. And that further, even more, sucks the well dry. And then, and you don't, and when you don't have the tools emotionally, which I did not have because I was relying on this process and this ethos that had been so ingrained in me that I just kept returning to that same well, even though it wasn't working, but I didn't have any other tools. And so the physical pain, the physical deterioration is so deeply connected to our emotional and mental selves. But I was so used to compartmentalizing those two and separating them. And that's so I was blind to what was going on in my own process. Because I just refused to acknowledge and connect the two for the
I
longest
to-
time.
yeah, I totally get that. Um, so you had also discussed. So here's maybe the only truly difficult question I may ask, but when we connected last week, there was an immediate resonance with you, and I feel it so much now. Would I have liked the pre-operative Michael Milobsky? Would we have connected, or what was it like? Were you just irritable? Were you short fused? What
Yeah, yeah.
was there a lot of like emotional reactivity happening in your life? What was that like?
I was highly reactive because I kept, especially towards the people closest to me, my kids, my spouse, because I felt so bad all the time. Yet I didn't really accept the fact that I was the only one that could do anything about it. And so my reactivity, everything emotionally triggered me. Someone's tone, someone's activity, someone's didn't show up for me the way I thought that they should. The why aren't you helping me? Even though I'm not telling you what I need, and even though I'm just silently brooding and checked out, but you're not doing anything to acknowledge what I'm going through. So why isn't anybody showing up for me, even though I had no ability to articulate that? And that was just the silent cycle I was in. Um, but but I was still pretty decent at putting on a fair act outside of the house. I mean, I could get through my day. I could do my job, but I could, but just barely. Like, by the end of the day, I was so drained that by the time I would drag myself home, uh, the only emotion or the only thing that people could get from me externally was just, negativity and reactivity. Um, I'm sure that I could have put on a decent show for a short conversation where you would have, you know, you would have we would have perhaps at least been cordial. But I think the people who suffered the most were the people who were my closest people, the my family, my spouse. They were the ones that bore the brunt of it,
It feels
for a
almost
very long
ironic
time.
that when people are in pain like you were, that oftentimes it's the people that are closest to us that get hurt the most, um, and that's sad. So, you had discussed, in our introduction and, that you had started a concierge practice. So, could you explain to the audience what that means? And then I'm curious what was in the logic of you pivoting from a standard pediatric practice to a concierge
So
practice.
the story of the concierge practice started 17 years ago when I was doing full-time ER, and,
Mhm.
as someone who is also a pediatric ER specialist yourself, um, one of my observations was, once again, I practice peds ER in community pediatric ERs outside of the tertiary care hospital. But 80% of the visits were just anxiety driven, not driven by an actual emergency, right? I don't know what else to do. The only person I could talk to was a triage nurse or a call center. So here I am. And so I started it as a idea as, hey, as an alternative to that, here I can offer, don't take insurance, but I can offer you a pediatric house call with an experienced pediatrician. And that's how it started. And that it stayed that way for a long time as kind of a side hustle. And it would sometimes get a little bigger, get a little smaller. And when the pandemic hit and so many people started moving to Denver from other parts of the country, and um, we started to, th- I started to get a lot more calls for people um, wanting it as their primary care, and I'd never really considered that. And then I started to really think about it, and then the idea started to grow. And then as all of us, and I don't know I don't think you've had the opportunity to practice, in the community setting but owning a business in the current uh, sort of healthcare landscape, especially in pediatrics, is becoming increasingly challenging because the value of what we do is eroding. Insurance dictating everything we do, not being able to spend time with people, not being able to really help people with complex problems that I can help you with, but I simply
Mm.
am not paid by your insurance to spend the time. So it's becoming really difficult to be satisfied and to really feel like I'm helping anymore because in order to keep the lights on and pay my employees, I have to see 40 people, which means that when you have a complex problem, even though I have the ability to help you, I simply don't have the time. And with more and more families showing interest in really, hey, this is valuable. My ability to access you, you, you're my, you wanting to spend time and really talk about complex things. And I had also during this problem process also became certified in addiction and really delving into adolescent mental health and addiction, and now metabolic
Mhm.
health, obesity. These are complex things that require time, and I would love to be able to help more people, but the insurance and healthcare system that we have, it simply doesn't allow it in this setting. Simply is impossible to do. And I wanted more out of what I was doing for patients. And the only way to do that in the current setting is to do it in a concierge setting and limit the number of people that I take care of and the relationship being direct. And then I have the time to do all of this. And it's way more connection. I feel way more connected to my work because I can really delve in and manage complex things. Um, and my relationships with these families are much deeper. And so for this part of my career, I decided that that's what I want for my
Mm.
care. So I embarked on building that, and the response has been phenomenal. And the name 17 years ago just came out of being a Jewish doctor. And so Chicken Soup Pediatric Concierge Care seemed like an obvious choice for the name. But, and as much as would love the system to be different, and I think obvious, it's obvious that this, it limits the amount of kids that I can help now for sure. But until the system changes, I can't fix the system, unfortunately.
So the idea of concierge practices is the families pay you a certain amount of money per month or
It's an
per
annual,
year.
they pay once a year,
Mhm.
and they have 24/7 access to me instead of all the gatekeeping and layers of that we have to when you have a pediatric office. You Volume is the only thing that keeps it open, and to handle that volume, you have to have layers of gatekeeping. And when people have sick kids and they've been waiting all night to call you, and then they run into a phone tree and a wait and a nurse line, and then by that time maybe we have appointments that day and maybe we don't, it's terrible. And so that gets rid of it. The parents have a question, they call me directly and I have a conversation with them. And I head off way more unnecessary visits, even unnecessary office visits. Oftentimes, people are forced to drag into the office because we just don't have the time to have a conversation with them about what's going on. So, my families who are doing it and they're signing up for it, they absolutely love it. Especially, they're busy, they're two income families. They are spending a lot less time waiting around and waiting for answers and getting their kids' needs met. And I do it mobily. So I come to their house, and the families who have newborns, they don't have to bring their baby to an office filled with sick other children. It all occurs at their house. And you have a need, you have a question, you have a concern, it gets answered by your doctor right away. And plus it builds amazing relationships, and I can also do their mental health, and I can also, do their urgent care and emergency care. I can do so much of it without them having to leave their house and having them wait through hours of phone trees and messages and calls back. It's just
That's
tremendous.
just wonderful. So I didn't mention this to you. I was a primary care doctor for 5
Yeah.
years on
Yeah.
the rural Oregon coast. To pay off my debt, I worked on a Native American reservation, and one of the things that I did was, for the newborn exams. I was in a traditional practice, but, for newborn exams, I made an effort to see every single one of those newborns, as a home visit. And, it was one of the most beautiful things that I was able to do. I got more out of it than I was able to give. But I'm
Yeah.
curious, you have a very different insight because, you're practicing the way we did 100 years ago, where doctors would come to the home, and I'm curious, you've now practiced in the emergency department setting, you've had a traditional practice. What is different when you're actually in the home of the child? Can you describe that, for a few minutes? So, like, what
Yeah.
is different about that?
The energy is totally different.
Mhm.
When you practice, both of us have been in the hospital setting, in the office setting, and in that traditional way, parents bring their kids in, and then there's this immediate sense of fear and apprehension and having to get the child over that hump. Or, you know, uh, let's just take the newborn or the infant where you're packing them up and you're sleeping, you're sitting in a waiting room, and then you're getting called back. When none of that stuff exists, and I come into their space, the energy and the connection and the ability to communicate, I believe, is transformative. Um, so much of that anxiety and fear and those things that I have to overcome in the kid seems way easier and mostly gone. And the energy of the family and the parents when they're sitting comfortably with their baby in their own home, and I come with everything that they need, there's just a greater sense of ease and security, and it leads to much more meaningful and deep conversations and the ability to really connect and really get to people's concerns. And it's it's just a whole different energy. The entire mode of how we interact with kids to me is completely different. When you when you take all those other traditional things away that we're just used to taking for granted, the crinkle paper on the table and all of that stuff is just gone. And so it completely alters the energy and changes the entire, I think, flow of these interactions. Especially also, there's no clock, there's no, well, I've got 4 more people now waiting in other rooms. It all drops away. And and it makes for a much more deeper connection through the process, in my opinion.
And what was your inspiration? You're such a wonderful speaker, and I love watching your shorts on Instagram. What motivated you to reach out and develop a social media presence? Because there are some folks. It's funny. I think we're probably around the same age. I think there are some people who are our age who are completely phobic about
Yeah,
social
for
media,
sure.
and then there are those like us that have sort of embraced it. And I'm
Yeah.
just curious, what energy made you want to get into that kind of work?
So I actually, I started social media. I've been dabbling in it for 5 or 6 years, or even longer, since,
Hmm.
when you own a business, it became clear about 8 or 9 years ago that this was just part of it. So I at least would dabble in it, but it wasn't anything that I really took seriously. And over the last few years, I see a lot. There's so many more pediatricians who are putting out content, and several of them, millions of followers, and they all. And but I realized that I had a very unique value to bring as someone who has, many of them. Some of my favorite creators. One's a pediatric allergist, and he does great content on that. The other is a phenomenal pediatric ER physician. That's all she's done. The other is a mom and a pediatrician and does a lot of content on that, and it's great. And she talks about and they have followers, but nobody had what I had. Uh, 7 children, 4 grandchildren, practicing across the entire spectrum of pediatric medicine for almost 30 years. I realized I had something very unique to bring and value to add that none of these people had. And so I just wanted to put it out there because I wanted to bring the value and
And it's
give people that perspective that, hey, that this is, I have something unique that I can share. So that's
sharing
where,
to 400,000 plus
yeah,
followers of
thank
you. And
God, it's been
just think
phenomenal.
about it. But think about that. I mean, I have been. I'm really excited that we're at 10,000, which we're still growing and in the beginning stages. But even with my 10,000 subscribers, I was very honored to be invited to go to the University of Chicago to give grand rounds, which is a big talk to the Department of Pediatrics about a topic, and I'm going to spend 72 to 96 hours traveling, schlepping, getting up to Chicago,
Yeah.
and spending hours and hours on a talk. And then I'm going to get to this auditorium, and there may be 50 people there, 50 people online. I give the talk, there's claps, whatever. And then that's 96 hours. And you can actually do a quick clip about something that is of interest and relevant, and it can reach hundreds of thousands of people. And it just
No, it's amazing.
the power of social media is really interesting, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, there are
It
some
is.
challenging aspects of social media, and I think you and I can both agree that
Sure.
many of the mental health, emotional issues that sometimes we're seeing in the pediatric population may be related to the phone.
Well, I tell everybody who has little kids or middle school kids that everyone needs to read
Wait,
Jonathan Haidt's
wait,
book.
wait. That's
Yeah.
what you say, right? Wait,
Well, yeah, I mean,
wait.
I say you need to read Anxious Generation.
Mm,
Jonathan Haidt's book, I think that he's probably the loudest voice that is giving parents a path to understand how they can alter the trajectory of their child's mental health simply by changing the relationship with technology and and the timing and understanding how that interacts with your child's normal brain and emotional development. And so I tell everybody that if you're a parent, you should be reading that book now, even if your kids are 3 years old or 4 years old, because
that's
you need
great
to understand
advice.
that this problem is not going away. But on the other hand, it's been a phenomenal tool to reach people. It's a force multiplier for amazing things to teach people. I mean, look, I get such amazing feedback. I have like hundreds and hundreds of DMs a day from people who just say, so appreciate your perspective and what you put out. And I find so much value. And that to me is, that's amazing. That's the reason why I wanted to take it seriously and do more. I feel like I have a story and a unique path and perspective that not many pediatricians have. And so, uh, you know, I have something to add to the conversation.
Well, Dr. Michael Milobsky, you are my hero. I really want to thank you for coming on the show because I think, again, not knowing who you are, when you became very vulnerable today and talking about a very difficult issue. And I think for anyone in healthcare listening to this story, they should be inspired by your transformation. And adult behavior change is incredibly difficult, and you've been able
Very
to do it.
difficult to break
You've been
old
able to do it,
patterns.
and you're very fortunate to have such a loving wife and children that love you and were able to support you through a transition. I'd love to have you back
But I
on the
think
sh-
your audience should know that in the end, none of that can help you unless you because
Want
no
to
one
help
can help you
yourself.
and except you. And that was the hardest thing for me to really like come around to is that I'm responsible here and no one else can do it for you.
Yeah. It's a great teaching point, great learning point, great life lesson. Thank you for being on the show, and
Thank you for
would
having
love
me.
to have you back at some point.
Oh, love to come back. Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you, David.
For everyone listening, thank you. Please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast channels for HUMED. This is Dr. David Spiro. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to HUMED with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.